All right, hello everybody, and welcome back to NFL Fantasy Live. It's almost Halloween, which means the costumes are coming out. You gentlemen are going as...
Jedi Knight. How about that?
I like it.
I'm going as a fantasy analyst.
Okay.
So your costume is...
I'm already hooked up.
Yeah.
I'm going to hook up my little girl. She loves Elmo, so I will try to dress up as a giant Elmo. We'll see how it goes.
Well, she would be a little... You're going to be the giant Elmo?
I'll be the giant
Wow.
Elmo. She'll
We
be
need photos.
Yeah, I know.
right.
But you probably won't get them. All right, but some fantasy players are already playing like Jekyll and Hyde, up 1 week, down another. Can't figure it out. That's why we got these guys here, though. Let's start by taking a look at Allen Robinson. He had a horrible week 1. That may have been the Josh Norman effect. We're not sure. But week 2 and week 5, he played well. And again, he played very well, but that was sandwiched in between two. So, I guess ho-hum fantasy performances there. What do we make of Allen Robinson long term?
He's been very touchdown dependent this year. 2 touchdowns in 2 games. Those were his 2 big fantasy games. And the other games, 8 or fewer fantasy points. But the upside is great. The offense is clicking. This is a very fantasy-friendly offense as well. So I think Allen Robinson, Marcus at worst, is a 3 flex every week.
No, absolutely. And I've liked Allen Robinson all season long, and I feel like he's gotten better now that we've seen more from Allen Hurns across the way. That's given defenses something extra to think about. This is a big play offense. It's a lot of Blake Bortles dropping back, looking down the field, throwing it 10, 15 yards down the field. But as long as Robinson remains the #1 receiver, he's worth a look in your lineup.
Allen Robinson, a young player. Vincent Jackson, a wily veteran. Let's take a look at how he's done over the last 5 weeks. Not great in week 1. And really, if you think about it, he's really broken out only really in week 4. He had his best game by far. And it was a little bit of a surprise as well because Josh Norman did cover him for a large portion of that game. And yet, there he was with 20 fantasy points. What do we make of Vincent Jackson long term?
Not a fan. I wasn't a fan last year. I'm not a fan this year. Too inconsistent for me to start. And as you said, he had his best game against a matchup that looked really bad, right,
Exactly.
on paper. And listen, you're also seeing Jameis Winston make too many mistakes. And at some point, Marcus, Mike Evans has got to get it going, right? Maybe?
Maybe. Look, man, this is what you signed up for when you put Vincent Jackson on your roster. This is who he has always been. The numbers at the end of the season might look okay, but that's because you get 2 or 3 huge games in between a bunch of mediocre or worse games. Yeah. That's it.
And as you mentioned, he's been like that ever since his days, even in San Diego.
Yeah.
So again, a terribly inconsistent play, but he could absolutely carry you week to week, or certain weeks versus other weeks. All right, let's take a look at Frank Gore. He's been called the fantasy terminator around these parts because he will not die. Week 1 and week 2 did not look great, but week 3 and 5, he looked pretty darn good. What do we make of the ageless Frank Gore?
Well, let's give him a pass, all right? You play the Bills and the Jets in the first 2 weeks.
Good point.
You're not going to put up numbers against that team or those teams unless you're Le'Veon Bell, Adrian Peterson, and Gore's clearly not on that level. But ever since those 2 games, he's been pretty good. And Gore is going to be an RB2 moving forward. He's got a good matchup this week against the Patriots. I'm playing him for sure. But that slow start had a lot to do with the fact that he had 2 really bad matchups. Oh, and, Marcus Gore needs to not fumble.
Yeah, that right there was a big killer. He looked like he was going in the end zone for a touchdown. He puts the ball on the ground. It's a huge swing right there. He is who I thought he was going to be so far. He had 2 very difficult matches at the start of the season, but you figure he still has another game against the Titans. He has another game against the Texans. Playing in that AFC South, it's very forgiving.
All right, there you go. How about Joe Flacco, though? We thought, look, he lost a lot of his weapons going into week 5. I thought he was going to struggle. I know the Browns haven't been great, but still, when you lose that many weapons, I thought he was going to struggle, and yet there he was. He had his best week of the season. What do we make of Joe Flacco long term?
Hey, man, he loves to play at home. Look at his numbers. 20-plus fantasy points in 2 home games this year. Brings up Motley Crue's Home Sweet Home for me,
There you go.
One of the best songs ever. I don't care what anybody says. I know it's old 80s glam rock, Marcus. But Flacco is very trustworthy when he plays at M&T Bank Stadium. But when he's not there, like this week against San Francisco, I don't trust him as much. But Flacco has proven that, like you said, he can put up some numbers even maybe if his top weapons are not healthy.
Yeah, that's been really impressive to me that he's doing this with Kamar Aiken really on the field right now. And so you got to be encouraged that he can do well when Steve Smith Sr. gets back into action. Look, he's a matchup-based starter. He's not a guy you're going to plug in every single week. But when the matchup's right, sure, I'd give Joe Flacco a role.
I like it. Another player who's been mightily inconsistent has been Eagles running back DeMarco Murray. He had his best game of the season last week, but can he do it again? To find out, we look at our next-gen stats presented by DraftKings. All right, when you take a look at DeMarco Murray, his first 3 games when he was pretty much healthy, I guess, 29 rush attempts. His rush yards, just 47 yards. Distance traveled per rush yard, though. You want to talk about north-south versus east-west.
Did a lot of running, didn't do a lot of running.
No, he did a lot of running, but didn't do a lot of running. Yes, you're absolutely spot on. Week 5 against New Orleans, much more north-south. Yeah, the distance traveled per rush yard, just 5 yards per every rush yard gained. All right, so 120 total yards and a touchdown, 18 points in standard against New Orleans. Does he build on that success moving forward?
I think he does. And I think the difference we've seen between the first 3 weeks and what you saw in week 5 is that they were using him differently. They were trying to get him to the edges and make him be somebody that he's not. Meanwhile, in week 5, he turned back into the DeMarco Murray we saw in Dallas, where he was one cut and get downhill. He wasn't trying to beat everybody to the corner and try to get outside. He was more between the tackles and, getting the runs where they were. I think he starts to run into problems when he's trying to do too much of that. That worked out, but I don't think he can live like that long term.
I've not been a fan of Murray all year long, and it's not because he's not a good running back. It's because of the touches and because of how much work he had last year. But the Eagles, as Marcus said, finally utilized him in a way where he can get opportunities and score fantasy points. So I think he's right back on the RB2 radar this week on Monday night against the New York Giants, who gave up over 15 fantasy points to Carlos Hyde last week.
All right, so there you go. That was Next Gen Stats presented by DraftKings. Be sure to go to NFL.com to get the latest Next Gen Stats news and information to help set your DraftKings rosters this week.